Hello everyone, Mohammed here, your candidate for Caldwell for the Greens, and I'm with some amazing speakers. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because I know that I cannot do justice to yourselves and the roles that you play in our community, but also the amazing work you've done today. So
Oh, hello. My name is May. I'm a Palestinian woman, part of the Palestinian Community Association in Victoria, and have been a long time guest activist, but also community organizer.
excellent. And yourself?
I'm David Glanz. I've been a supporter of the Palestinian cause for almost half a century. I'm Jewish, and I'm very proud to have helped organise today's rally, which was spearheaded by Jews for Palestine, and to march down here and join the rest of the Palestinian crew.
It's been a fantastic day today, and I've loved your speech within regards to the family. Can you tell us a little bit about that family for anyone who's missed it?
Yes, so being Palestinian and being Indigenous Palestinian, it may surprise quite a lot of people, not no one who is Palestinian, to know that I have family that are Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, and grew up in a very inclusive household that was very supportive of many family members, and it's been something that really does push against some of the racist narrative that Israel and its propagandists say. Palestinians are fighting for liberation from settler colonialism and apartheid, and we're just fighting for equal rights and liberation from oppression, really.
A lot of people don't realize that we had all three faiths living in that land for so many years without any issues until what happened in throughout Europe. How about yourself, David? What brought you to this cause?
I hate racism, always have done. In some ways, because of being Jewish and having suffered some anti-Semitism, rather than withdrawing into my shell and seeing everybody else as the enemy, I saw racism as the enemy, and therefore it's important to stand up against all its forms. And I see this as an anti-racist struggle. Israel is an apartheid state like South Africa. It discriminates on the basis of race or ethnicity or however you want to put it. And I think that's fundamentally flawed. And it is the root cause of so much misery, of the Nakba, of the rounds of ethnic cleansing, including the one that Donald Trump would like to oversee now. And as I said to the crowd earlier, Netanyahu essentially says from the river to the sea, Israel will be sovereign over the West Bank and over Gaza. When he says that, what he means is there will be a Jewish state at the exclusion of all others. When we in the pro-Palestine movement chant from the river to the sea, we're talking about a territory that will be cleansed of racism, of apartheid, and where, as you said, people of all faiths and none can live together. And I remind people of South Africa. South Africa was absolutely stained by apartheid. When apartheid was overthrown, people live side by side, not always in complete harmony, but everybody has formal equality. There's a black president. The white population is welcome to stay and take part. And I would hope at some point Jews in Israel will make the conscious decision to stay there as citizens of a free and united Palestine. I think that's a future we can look forward to. Jews, Muslims and Christians together as neighbours again.
I think for me, the message of being able to be united as a community without racism is one of the best things that is possible, to be able to clarify to people that it's possible. It has happened. It used to be the case for many years throughout the Middle East, throughout the Ottoman Empire and before that. There were all faiths there. Even now, there are still Muslims and Christians living together, both suffering the racism that Israel has put on them. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, the apartheid that exists is now internationally recognized. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It's recognised by every international organisation, by the United Nations, Amnesty International. I mean, the list goes on. And I think it's really important to understand that, currently we're facing in the movement a very racist conflation between campaigning for Palestinian sovereignty and human rights and ideas of anti-Semitism. And I think, David, in this practice of occur today is to show, no, this is not the case. You know, we're an inclusive movement. We stand against all forms of racism. And it's really, really concerning then when you have, you know, public officials and, you know, the media trying to incite this level of confusion and I think hatred. And actually it's a form of racism. You know, it's racist scapegoats to try and other a marginalized community further because they're fighting and, you know, trying to fight for human rights and justice.
Yeah.
You know, this at the end of the day is a human rights issue. It is a fight for freedom and against persecution. We are looking for peace. And we shouldn't be afraid to be able to say that. But unfortunately, they are creating an environment that makes it, you know, a risk to you personally and a risk to the community to just say, hey, I stand against human rights violations.
Yeah.
You know, I don't stand with genocide. This should not be something that's contentious. But unfortunately, we're finding that everyday Australians are being persecuted and marginalised because of that.
Well, I was going to ask as well, you say that apartheid has been recognised by so many different institutions, international institutions, and widely, you know, like the United Nations, I think, also released a final report recognising that Israel is an apartheid state.
Yeah.
Our government doesn't seem to recognise that.
Well, I know. I think David and I could share similar ideas in this, and I think it's because we live in a settler colonial country. Let's be frank, this country was founded on colonisation and genocide as well. You know, the British Empire had its teeth throughout the rest of the world, you know, as they say, controlling the natives, the barbarians, and seizing their land and civilizing them. And in fact, you know, Zionist ideology is built on the same type of racist colonialist mindset, which is we need to control the barbarians, the uncivilized, and make it civilized. And it's that same racist dynamic that you know this country is built on, and we're seeing it supplant. Obviously, we're seeing it in under the Israeli state and all its policies and practices. So it's not a stretch to say that there is an alliance between these Western countries, such as Australia, with the state of Israel. The question, though, is that you are still accountable to us, your population, and we, the people here, say no. We don't stand with apartheid, settler colonialism, and genocide. You know, we actually believe in human rights, and when we say to our governments, do you not stand with the United Nations and the, you know, that we're signatories to, you know, the United Nations Convention, that means something. There are legal binding, you know, agreements between us to, you know, the rest of the world. And so it has to mean something. It has to stand for something. And so we're telling our government, you need to speak up and start, you know, standing for Palestinian rights and sanction Israel. At the very least, you need to sanction Israel, boycott, divest, and sanction.
One of the things that I've loved is the position Nelson Mandela took, you know, in being able to say that there is an apartheid state, we can fight it and go to a stage where we totally change the culture from that apartheid state to being able to live in harmony, as you mentioned earlier. So that can happen if people do speak up. And Australia, I know that we've gone through that history and we did speak up for South Africa eventually. You know, it started off with a protest of, I think, just 6 people in a shop, in a grocery store. You know, that's where it started. And
Everyday people.
That's right, everyday people.
You know, got together, organised as a community, went out and protested, exercised our, you know, democratic right of protest, and we were able to change history. And it was everyday people. It wasn't that the government finally grew a conscience and said, this is wrong. It's when people put pressure on the government and say, hey, you speak for us and you need to do something about this and take a stand, until finally, you know, apartheid South Africa was isolated on the world stage, as it rightly should have been. It was a pariah state and was held accountable. And the same thing should happen to Israel. The reality is it has been rogue for decades and has been allowed to commit these atrocities. You know, there are ways in which it can be held accountable, but our government is choosing not to exercise its legal requirements.
So I'm trying to bring it back to our local community. I'm thinking that in our community here, the position that the government is taking in supporting such a pariah state, allowing them to conflate and bring in these two issues of, you know, standing against Israel is standing against Jewish people. It's hurting even our own community here that are Jewish people who want to stand for the right, you know, of people around the world. When we said never again, we actually meant never again. But here we are, we're seeing it happen and we're turning a blind eye to it and trying to say that anytime we stand against this, we're standing against Jewish people. Do you feel like that's the position that the government is putting your community in, people like yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's been a string of ministers and the Prime Minister who have effectively said that the Palestine rallies are anti-Semitic. And then you get it coming from Peter Dutton. Peter Dutton is a racist. He was on the record racist against Lebanese people, on the record racist against African people, and now he's suddenly discovered he's against racism when it's anti-Semitism. And I think what that illustrates is actually he's not an anti-racist. He's looking for a stick to beat the Palestine movement. And that's why Jewish supporters of Palestine came out today, because we wanted to call out and say, no, when you say it's anti-Semitic to be for Palestine, we're Jews and we're saying that's not the case. And I think you look at the bigger picture, Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, said that anti-Semitic attacks in Israel were directly sheeted home to the Labour government allowing us to protest on the streets for Palestine. What did Netanyahu do just a few days ago? He went to America, shook hands with Elon Musk. Elon Musk supports Nazis in Germany. He supports Nazis in Britain. He gave the Nazi salute at the Trump's inauguration. But for Netanyahu, he's a friend of Israel. And I think that what that means is we have a choice. Do you want to stand with Israel, even if it means standing with racists and Nazis like Elon Musk? Or do you want to stand against racism, stand for unity of Jews, Christians and Muslims? And Netanyahu makes it very simple. I am with May. She is my comrade in arms. She is not my enemy. We stand together against the system based on racism. Netanyahu is my enemy, even though he's Jewish and I'm Jewish, because he's prepared to stand with anti-Semites to justify the genocide. He's a hypocrite, he's a butcher, and we reject him completely.
It would be fantastic if we can get our government to come out and say the same. I think, as I was saying earlier, like all it takes for evil to flourish is for good people to do nothing. And I think the level of silence from our government in Australia, we've got Albanese currently in power, not saying anything against Trump whatsoever, despite the fact that he's pushing this narrative about breaking international laws, totally scrapping the ICJ and the ICC because he's not happy with their rulings and the way that they're going and whether they have jurisdiction.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say we're not even asking for you to have a moral conscience at this stage. We're asking you to follow our international human rights legal obligations. We're asking you to follow our own legal obligations. So the issue isn't even saying, hey, you need to have a moral conscience, because at this stage...
Sorry. Isn't Penny Wong saying that we do support the ICC and the ICJ?
Well, and that means you need to start enforcing it. If you support it, you need to enforce it. You know, Australia has not publicly come out to say they will enforce the ICC ruling. They haven't. Every other country, we've had, I believe Colombia's come out.
Germany, I got a list with so many countries, yeah.
A country who, talks about democracy and the right of, rule of law, can't even enforce their own obligations, their legal obligations.
And you look at Albanese, just in the last few days, leader after leader around the world has lined up to say that Trump's ethnic cleansing plan is wrong. Albanese is tying himself in knots to avoid it. Now, part of this is, I think he's a very weak leader, and that's increasingly being recognised in focus groups and is part of the reason for Labor's collapse. But I think it's also due to the fact that Australia is very deeply bedded into the US alliance, and for Western imperialism led by the US, but backed up by Australia, the Middle East is an area of enormous strategic importance. Bottom line, 50% of the world's oil supplies are in the Middle East. Bottom line, 30% of the world's shipping container traffic goes through the Suez Canal. The US and Australia can't trust Egypt, can't trust Jordan, can't trust Syria, can't trust Lebanon. They can trust Israel because it is the only country which is completely embedded into Western imperialism. So they will forgive anything that Israel does because Israel is their bully on the ground to defend their interests. And I think that is reflected in Albanese. His loyalty is to Australian capitalism, not to the rule of law, not to morality or human rights.
Which I guess if any nation or any government around the world has that kind of position like ours does, it's putting, to bring it back all the way home, it's putting our community at risk as well. Because it's basically my understanding, and this is why this issue is so important, because I feel in an area such as Cornwall, where I'm trying to represent and run for government in the next election, federal election, I'm seeing we have the highest number of very culturally diverse migrant communities. We have the highest number of Muslim members of any seat in Victoria, to the point that we have someone from a Palestinian background being handpicked by Labor and just dumped into that seat to try to virtue signal that they're supporting the Palestinian cause, when we know their history throughout the whole atrocious attack since October 7, even though it didn't start then, but this is their position. And we're also seeing that our community is seeing them not give any regard to anyone from brown skin, black background, brown background, Muslim. They all don't seem to matter as much as commercialism, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly.
No. For Albanese, profits for Australian bosses come first. Human rights, a dim, distant last.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap it up because the protest is coming around. So I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate all the work you're both doing. I wish you all well.
All right. Good luck in the election.
Thank you so much.